All right. All right, we should be good. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yep, y'all good?
All right, here we go. All right, so thanks to everyone for joining, and I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. I know a lot of you may be Kiawah residents, but I always like to start with a little, intro about the island and its makeup. So obviously Kiawah is a coastal barrier island. We are a gated residential resort community. The island's about 8,000 total acres. About 5,000 of that is upland acres. So that's high and dry land. And then the remainder is, tidal salt marsh and ponds as well. 5 golf courses on the island. We have a little under 1,800 residents, close to 3,400 developed lots, and over 4,000 residential properties. So for those who don't know, the town has 2 biologists on staff full time. We conduct a variety of research projects, and I thought it'd be good just to kind of give everyone an idea of how we choose the animals that we study. So in a nutshell, we focus on keystone and indicator species. So a keystone species is any species of animal that's vital for ecosystem health. Typically, they can alter the habitat in which they live. And so examples of keystone species would be bobcats, alligators, and of course, deer. And then the other group of species that we focus on are what we call indicator species. So these are species that are typically used to monitor changes in the environment. You can look at the effectiveness of management strategies by monitoring trends in these types of animals. And they're often really good at providing warning signals for potential ecological problems. So examples would be migratory songbirds, marsh sparrows that live in our tidal salt marsh, painted buntings, and Wilson's plover. So each of those kind of uses a different type of habitat. And so if you see declines in those species, it may indicate you have an issue with that particular habitat. But obviously we're here today to talk about bobcats. So just kind of start off with a little bit of background on bobcats. They're about twice the size of a domestic cat. Males weigh between 12 and 68 pounds. Here at Kiawah, an adult male is going to weigh probably between 20 and 28 pounds. Females are smaller, 9 to 34 across their range, and here 14 to 20. We've never had a female over 20 pounds. They breed in late winter, early spring, February through April. Kittens are born 62 days later. They typically have 1 to 3 kittens, but we've had as many as 5 in a den here at Kiawah before. They are solitary animals, except during the breeding season. And then when you have females with kittens, obviously once she has kittens, those kittens are going to stay with her for about a year. They are a visual predator. They don't have a very good sense of smell. So they catch their prey primarily by, stalking. They see movement and they stalk into that area and catch the animal, or they'll lay in wait and wait for something to come along. They feed primarily on rodents, rabbits, birds, and deer. So a little bit on bobcats on Kiawah specifically. The island has historically been home to 30 to 35 bobcats. I already touched a little bit on what they eat, but in some of our food habit studies, we've determined that on Kiawah, their primary prey throughout the year are rodents, but they key in on deer fawns during the spring and birds during the winter months. Their average home range size on Kiawah, so the area in which they spend their lives, varies. So males around 1,500 acres, maybe a little bit larger. Females are around 800 acres. Those of you who live on Kiawah know that they're an iconic species out here. Our residents love them. They're very important for our conservation efforts as well. So for that reason, we've done a lot of research with bobcats, and I'm just going to kind of real quickly go through kind of the start of our research program and kind of bring you up to present day, and then we'll talk about some future research that's coming down the pipeline here soon. So our first study to track bobcats was in 2000. We captured 12 bobcats and we fitted them with VHF collars. We followed that up with a study in 2004 and 2005, where we tracked 16 bobcats and 5 gray foxes. So in each of these studies, we used these VHF collars to track them for about a year. And we were looking at home range size, habitat use, survival, mortality, dispersal, and then finding denning sites. And so just real quick, how VHF, technology works. Now we're using GPS, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. But in the old days, we used VHF. And so to get a location for an animal, you had to be in the field, whatever time of day or night you wanted to know where that animal was. And it wasn't as simple as just, you hear a signal and you know where the animal is. So typically we would have to triangulate the location of these animals. So that would be going to 3 different sites and effectively listening with a directional antenna, figuring out the approximate bearing to the animal, and then going back to the office and drawing that out to figure out about where they were. And so it was fairly imprecise locations. So we were really glad when GPS came along and got small enough to go in bobcat collars. And so that kicked off our Bobcat GPS study, which is our current, large bobcat study here on the island. We've been running it every year since 2007. So we trap every winter for about 2 months. Since the study began, we've collared 92 bobcats, 52 females and 40 males. And so, obviously with VHF, we had to be out in the field. With GPS, we don't. We simply program the collars to collect a location, whenever we want, every 2 hours, every 4 hours. And then ultimately that data gets sent to us. And so obviously, why are we collecting all of this location data? Well, we're looking at, patterns in habitat use during day and nighttime hours, denning sites, travel corridors, trying to learn as much as we can about this important species so that we can better protect it. So start real quick with, well, how do we catch a bobcat? So we use cage traps, and our attractant is a live bantam rooster. They're in a separate compartment in the back of the trap. The bobcat cannot get to the rooster. As you can see in this lower photo here, he's eye to eye with the rooster, but the rooster's perfectly fine. And then so once we've got him in the cage, obviously we're going to sedate him. We'll take him out, take a variety of measurements, put a collar on him. We'll put him back in the cage and wait, 3 to 5 hours until the sedative wears off, and then we'll let him go. And so I always like sharing some of these release videos. So I got 2 of them for you. Here's the first one on how you release bobcat. They're much faster than that. All right, last one. This one's probably my favorite. So I've tried this trick with my, putting my cell phone down and recording video of the releases, and I've probably tried it 60 times, and 2 or 3 times it actually works where they run towards the phone itself. All right, so we'll talk a little bit, we'll get a little bit into kind of the type of data that we get and kind of what we do with it. And then I'll show you a little bit of data, but we won't spend a whole lot of time on this. But in general, in kind of pulling all these points together for bobcats and then breaking it down by the types of habitat that they spend their time in, we've learned a lot of things about, bobcat behavior and critical areas of importance for bobcats. And so this is just a breakdown of the different habitat types on the island. And then we took daytime points for a subset of bobcats. And so what we saw, which is no surprise, is that scrub shrub habitat and forested habitats are where a bobcat's pretty much going to be during daytime hours. And obviously scrub shrub habitat is the most important daytime cover for bobcats. And so scrub shrub is basically dense understory with little overhead cover. And you typically find that on Kiawah in the secondary and tertiary dunes and along the marsh edge. And so if we keep that same data and we throw in nighttime locations, obviously they're moving around more, and so they're going to utilize different habitats for hunting. Shrub still remains pretty important, as well as forest, but developed properties actually almost triple in use during nighttime hours, because our cats are actively hunting between homes and in backyards. And then roadways pop up a little bit, quite a bit during nighttime. And that's the entire road envelope, if you will, or road easement. So, along our roadways, there's a lot of cover, and cats certainly use those buffers for hunting at night. And so I'll just take the time to show you just an example from one bobcat from a number of years ago that kind of exhibits a typical pattern of movement. And so this is a female bobcat, and these are her points over a period of 30 days. So we start with her daytime points. So I guess to jump back, so the blue line represents her entire home range. So this is the area in which she lives. And this is down here along the beach. This is Surf Song, and the V-gate is right here, just to kind of orient you to where we are. So, obviously, as I showed you in that habitat table, during the daytime, these animals, this female in particular, are packed into this shrub habitat. In her case, that's along the beachfront and the dunes. And obviously, a lot of clusters of points down there. And we'll kind of zoom in on one of them just to take a look at it. So, as I said, so red is shrub habitat. So you see we've got basically a strip of great bobcat habitat between the homes and the active beach. And this female is in some of these areas, quite frequently, very close to boardwalks, but again, in pretty dense understory cover. And so now we'll jump back to the whole map, and I'll throw on her nighttime points. And so obviously at night, she's out and about, she's hunting throughout her home range, spending time, as I showed in the table, residential properties, along roadways, leisure trails, that sort of thing. All right, so another thing that we do with this data, and to kind of better understand it and ultimately better understand specific areas on the island that are really important to bobcats, is we take the home range, and in this example, this is an adult male. So he's got a home range that stretches from the Surf Song area all the way down towards the ocean course. And so we start with his 95% home range, which is basically considered to be his normal home range. And then we look even further at his core home range, which is typically where 25% of his points are. And so we take that data, we kind of tease it out. And so now we've got an idea of areas on the island that are really important to this individual bobcat. And so that's one piece of the puzzle in kind of understanding, how to protect, manage, enhance properties to create more of this habitat and protect what's already out there. So another thing that we look at, when we're trying to find, areas of critical importance to bobcats, obviously they need areas to raise their kittens successfully. So we spend a lot of time analyzing denning data and denning success. And so just in general, bobcat dens are typically located in larger undeveloped areas away from people. Bobcats don't create a den, so they don't dig out a hole in the ground. They utilize a variety of kind of natural features as a den, which could be everything from pine straw under a palm frond to an old palm stump. There's not a definitive bobcat den that you could recognize, basically. And so they tend to prefer the secondary dunes and the edges of marsh for these den sites. And the female does move her den site several times in the first 2 months. And so I got a quick little kitten video for you there. They weren't super happy, but they went right back in the den after the video. All right. So over the years, we've found close to 50 dens, bobcat dens here on the island. And so this map just shows, where we found them. And this goes all the way back to our original study in 2000. And so, obviously when we see this data, again, just like with the location data, we're looking for clusters of den sites over the years that suggest a really important, area to protect. And so there are three that jump out at you on this. Captain Sam Spit has historically been a very heavily used denning site. The second really heavily used area is along Flyway Drive. This is in the Royal Beach Ocean Palms area. And then the third one is along Ocean Course Drive, basically between the homes on Ocean Course and the golf course. There's a great strip of good scrub shrub, dense understory cover. And that area has been heavily used for denning sites. In fact, our first den this year that we found was in that location. So it's still a really important area. And so, I kind of gave you some of the data that we have and kind of how we use it. And then, our next step is to develop a plan to protect, manage bobcats on the island. And so when we originally did this, we divided the island up into 5 different areas we call bobcat management units. And that was basically based on development patterns across the island. Obviously, development is more intense on the western end of the island, and there's less development on the eastern end of the island, at least in terms of density. And then each of these BMUs basically represents the home range size approximately of an adult male bobcat. So the idea is, we've got these different management units. They're all a little bit different. And so we want to manage the habitat specifically within those units. And so we break that down even further, utilizing the data that I talked about before, looking at clusters of points, den sites, to come up with basically critical habitat areas for bobcats on the island. We call those important bobcat areas, or IBAs. And so at this point, we have 56 of those on the island. And so we look at each IBA individually, who owns the property, what condition is it in, what are the future plans for it, and then develop strategies to preserve, protect, enhance those areas, because we know how critically important they are for bobcats. And so just to summarize our GPS data project, a lot of this I've already touched on, but bobcats spend the majority of daylight hours in patches of thick cover. They don't move a whole lot during the day. During the day, they're normally going to be in shrub habitat along the marsh edge or in the secondary dunes. And then at night, they're going to travel through and forage in developed areas, road corridors, etc. The one thing I guess I didn't mention is that they tend to avoid golf courses. Obviously, there's no cover, there's no food for them on golf courses. So even at night, it's rare for a bobcat to be on a golf course. All right, so things were humming along fine. Kiawah's bobcat population was healthy and doing great. And then a couple of years ago, we kind of came to a bump in the road. And I'm sure most of you are aware, but basically in 2017, we started to see an increase in bobcat mortality. So the historic mortality rate for bobcats on Kiawah, from our collared animals, has typically been less than 10% per year. And we jumped as high as 75% last year. And so, along with that, our reproduction dropped substantially. Typically, we would have found a couple of dens every year from our females. We've only found 2 dens in the last 4 years, and that includes the one from last week. So obviously, if you have an increase in mortality and a drop in reproduction, then your population is going to decline substantially. The other thing that we saw that, further, confirmed that bobcat numbers were declining was that we saw a rapid increase in our deer numbers on the island. And so I'll touch on that real quick. So Another research project that I didn't mention that we conducted between '02 and '05 was looking at survival of fawns on the island. And so we tracked 124 fawns from the day they were born until their collars fell off after about a year or until they died. And so this provided us definitive data that bobcats were exerting a very heavy influence on the deer population out here. So in this study, bobcats preyed on 70 out of the 124 fawns. So that's 56% of them in the first 2 weeks. And so as you can see in the graph below, going back to 97, our deer population has remained relatively stable until you get to 2017. And then obviously you can see that rapid increase that I talked about. All right, so why is this happening? What's going on with our bobcats? And I'm sure most of you know this, but what we've come to determine is that the use of anticoagulant rodenticides is playing a very large role in reducing our bobcat numbers out here. So just wanted to give you some information on that and some of the data we've collected, but just generally about these products themselves. So an anticoagulant rodenticide is a pesticide. It's a poison, obviously used to control rat and mouse populations around homes and restaurants and agricultural areas. So the way they work is they inhibit the body's recycling of vitamin K, which is vital to the blood clotting process. And so once a rodent gets a lethal dose, they effectively bleed to death over the course of 3 to 7 days, and then they die. And so there are two different types of these anticoagulants. The first one are called first generations. These have been around for a long time. They have a much lower toxicity. So they're what's called a multiple feed bait. So a rodent or a rat or a mouse has to eat this bait repeatedly over time in order to get a lethal dose. And so examples of first generation anticoagulants are chlorphecinone, warfarin, and diphecinone. And then in the 70s, chemical companies developed a more potent type of anticoagulant, which are called second generation anticoagulants. So whereas the first generation products were multiple feed baits, these are single dose baits. So if a rat goes in there and has one feeding on that bait, it's going to die. So they have a much higher direct toxicity to the rat, but they also have a much higher secondary toxicity to animals that might feed upon that rodent. And so examples of second generation products include brodifacoum, bromadiolone, difenicum, and diphthiolone. And then the little chart here to the right basically just kind of demonstrates how this works, how it moves up the food chain. And so obviously your rodent is eating the bait, it's getting sick or dying, then it's preyed upon by either a bird of prey, it could be a bobcat directly, gray fox, coyote, raccoons, and then your bobcat is sitting here at the top of the food chain. And so obviously they're eating rats and mice as well, but they're also eating raccoons and possums and other things that potentially are feeding on infected rodents. And so, over time it builds up in their system. And so I guess a little bit more, specific info on second gen products. And I've touched on a little bit of this in the first slide. So obviously they're much more lethal because they don't kill the animal immediately, even though the animal, the rodent gets a lethal dose in that first feeding, they're going to keep eating the bait until they die. So they can get really high levels of these compounds in their system before they die. And so obviously, as I said in the first slide, a predator is going to eat these dead or dying rodents. And then these second gen products will build up inside their liver. It takes up to a year for them to break down. And so, if they're constantly being exposed to this, it can build up to lethal levels pretty quickly. And we've seen that on Kiawah. So I guess, the problem with the use of SGAs on wildlife in general is it's very well known. There are lots of studies across the globe that show how these chemicals, move up the food chain and affect large predators, birds of prey in particular. But there's limited research on impacts of wildlife in the Southeast, and no research in South Carolina that I'm aware of up until now. So many of you probably already know this, but I think it's important to, to highlight the direct impacts that we've seen to Kiawah bobcats from SGAs in particular. So we've had 7 direct bobcat deaths from these products. The first one, which is the one that opened our eyes to this issue, was back in August of 2019. That was an adult female. And then last year we had an adult male die in May, as well as an adult female in June. And the one in June was particularly tragic because she died during labor along with her 4 kittens. So obviously, all of this is, told us that we need to figure out a way to address this issue the best we can. And I'll talk a little bit about it in the next slide, but, as we test animals, a variety of animals, at least with bobcats, every animal we've tested has been exposed to these products. So a little bit about the impacts to other wildlife on Kiawah. So kind of once we, as I said, once we learned about this problem in late 2019, we started taking a variety of steps. So one of them was that we began to collect animals to test, take liver samples and send them to a lab to look at exposure rates and levels of these anticoagulants. And so to date, we've tested 51 animals on Kiawah. 73% of those have been exposed to a 2nd generation anticoagulant. That includes all of our bobcats, 6 out of 6 that we've tested, 17 out of 29 raccoons. So 59% of raccoons have been exposed, 85% of possums. And then we have obviously a smaller sample size of a couple of different birds of prey and 1 roof rat. We just don't encounter those animals very often to get them tested, but all of those have showed exposure. So, clearly this data says, okay, these products are throughout the ecosystem and just about everything that's out there. And so one more thing I'll share, and this is, a map that takes the data from those 51 animals that we've tested and just displays it spatially. And so it does so utilizing larger circles for higher concentrations of anticoagulants in the animal system. And so in this case, red are raccoons and blue are possums. So I only use those 2 animals because they have relatively small home ranges. And so we know that if we see a high concentration in a particular area, that animal picked it up in that particular area. Whereas if we looked at a point for a bobcat, it's going to be roaming over, 1,500 acres. And so we have, that doesn't really tell us anything about where the product might have been picked up. So in general, we see lower exposure on the extreme western and eastern ends of the island. And fairly, we've certainly gotten some fairly high levels in the preserve, along Governors, down on Flyway, off of Sea Forest near the sanctuary, and a few other areas. All right, so in light of all this, what have we done? What has the town done? So the first thing we tried to do, and many of you are probably aware of this, so I won't dwell on it too much, but the town tried to plan to pass an ordinance to ban the use of these products. We were told by the state that we were not allowed to do that. It was prohibited by state law. And so we kind of switched gears and launched our public education program. We call the Bobcat Guardian program. And so this program, was designed to seek voluntary compliance by the industry, by individuals, by companies to stop using SGAs on Kiawah. And so at this point, we have 30 pest management companies that have taken the pledge not to use these products. 20 businesses and island entities, and 655 residential properties. We have a website, that highlights this program and promotes the individuals and the groups that have taken the pledge. And then we continue to work with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, the South Carolina Pest Control Association, and a variety of other groups throughout the state to better tackle this issue. And so some of that will be highlighted when I talk about our future research plans here in just a minute. But this issue has gotten a lot of press across the state, across the country. Most of the big conservation groups in our state have gotten on board with educating on this issue and trying to work for a change. We were successful in having a Senate bill introduced in March that would allow municipalities like Kiawah to regulate SGAs. But at this point, that bill has not moved forward, and very well might, and most likely will not move forward. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears to kind of the last portion of my talk today, and we're going to talk about a new study that has some familiar themes, but is really designed at better understanding the anticoagulant issue, and better understanding its impact on all wildlife on Kiawah. And so this project has 5 main objectives, and so I'm going to run through each of those. So the first objective of this study is basically a continuation of the work that we're already doing. So we will monitor the concentrations of SGAs and bobcats and assess patterns in bobcat behavior and survival over the next 3 years. So that's going to involve catching bobcats, putting GPS collars on them, collecting blood samples to potentially look at SGA exposure in their blood. We're also potentially going to be using some new technology to look at potential exposure in their feces or droppings. So that can be done. And so obviously, if we can do that, we can get a lot more data from bobcats and exposure over time. So the second objective is basically to go back and assess historical patterns in bobcat behavior and demography on the island over time using all of our historic data, right? So we've got data from 2007. As I said, we've got 150,000 locations on bobcats. And so in this objective, that data will basically be looked at again. There'll probably be some fairly extensive modeling of population size over time using some kind of fancy techniques, if you will. And so this will be really interesting. And I'm excited to get a lot of that old data kind of pulled into one place, and get it published as well, because there'll obviously be a number of publications that'll come out of this research project. And so the third objective is to look at patterns in bobcat diet. And the hope here would be to determine which prey species are most likely to contribute to SGA poisoning. And so this ties into objective 5, which I'll touch on in just a second. But obviously, if you don't know, you can collect scat from bobcats. You dry it out, and then you can look at the hairs and bones that are in the scat to figure out what that bobcat is eating. And so, if we determine that most of the rodents they're eating are roof rats, then that's, they're most likely the route in which they're most likely to be impacted. Obviously we could find a lot of raccoon and possum hair in there, then we would know that potentially they're picking it up, by eating raccoons and possums. So it could provide a lot of insight on exactly the mode, or the most common mode in which these products are getting into the systems of bobcats. So the fourth objective will be to continue to look at SGAs in small carnivores other than bobcats over the next 3 years. So that's kind of the middle of this food web, if you will, as these SGAs potentially move up the food chain. So it'll be continuing to look at raccoons, possums, and any other animals over the next 3 years. And then the last objective, we'll look at an area that I'm really excited about better understanding, is basically, the bottom of the food chain. The rats and the mice on this island, how many do we have? What types of species? What are their population densities? And then also we're going to look at concentrations and exposure to SGAs in these rodents as well. So again, just trying to understand all the little pieces of this puzzle so that we can make better decisions. And so with that, these are, I kind of went over the objectives of the study. And so what we hope to learn and what we think the benefits will be, I'll just kind of run through those. So the first will be that we'll better understand impacts of rodenticides on bobcats and other wildlife. We will develop best practices for rodent control in developments to minimize impact to wildlife and the environment. Obviously, we hope to create a sustained population of bobcats and other wildlife on Kiawah. And then, but also, keep in mind that there are, potential issues with rodents becoming overabundant or causing damage. And so we still need to basically have a strategy for homeowners and companies to deal with that. And so we hope that this will provide, kind of the best practices to control rodents in developments without impacting wildlife. And then obviously not only is it going to benefit Kiawah, but we hope that it will serve as a model for, how people and animals, wildlife can live together, peacefully in developed areas without impacts to either one. And so this is a pretty big study. The price tag on this study is close to $1 million. So there's a lot of funds that are needed to get this program underway. And at this point, the partners on the project are the Town of Kiawah, Clemson University, the Conservancy, we think will be on board very soon, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and then we're hopeful that we'll get funding from the pesticide industry itself, but we still do not have a firm commitment from them at this point. And so in terms of the timeline, next steps for getting this project going, we're still in the kind of securing funding stage, but we do have a significant amount of funds already secured. So we've gone ahead and selected a graduate student. She will be starting next month. So at this point, once she gets on board, we'll be working on kind of getting her up to speed, getting support staff and others that will be needed to help with field work here on Kiawah. And the project will officially begin July 1st of this year. And once it gets underway, we will have a website dedicated to the project up and running. There'll be frequent updates on, how the project is going and what we're learning throughout the project. It'll be 3 years of field work, and then an additional year of the graduate student writing her dissertation, and that sort of thing. And so the project should be complete by August of 2025. So my last slide is, okay, well, how can you help? How can you help bobcats? How can you help with the rodent issue? And so, the first one is, obviously we can help bobcats by protecting, preserving their habitat. And I talked about, a lot of the data that shows what those really important habitats are. And so those are typically marsh edges, dunes, any area of dense understory on this island is great bobcat habitat. And obviously following our bobcat management guidelines, which identify these critical areas, and continuing to focus efforts to protect those areas. And then also, controlling invasive species. So, invasive species like Phragmites and tallow tree can come into these these natural areas of great bobcat habitat and mess them up pretty good. So we have to keep a handle on invasive species as well. And then obviously protecting what we have is important, but also creating new bobcat habitat. And so some of the best ways you can do that, are obviously to plant native plants, dense understory, in individual yards, common areas, buffers. And so the town launched a Grow Native initiative a couple of years ago to really encourage this. We have a website, it's grownativekiawah.com. There's a lot of good information there. There's a whole plant database where you can, effectively search by, plant type and color and bloom time to come up with a good native that will provide, critical wildlife habitat in yards and common areas and look pretty as well. And so then on the rodenticide issue, if you're an individual homeowner, no matter where you live, it's the best strategy if you have a rodent issue is to follow what's called integrated pest management. So the first step is to figure out if you have a problem or not. And so a lot of times, homeowners will call and say, hey, I saw a rat run across my backyard. I've got a rat problem. And the answer is no, you live on Kiawah, you live anywhere in this country, you're going to see a rat or a mouse outside in your yard from time to time. They're a part of our ecosystem. They're out there. So it's only a problem when they're causing damage, to your home or getting inside the structure. And so if that's going on, then you need to take action. But if not, you don't. And so the first type of corrective action is to, basically do things that don't involve control of the species. So that would be things like removing food and water sources, sealing up homes with hardware cloth, that type of thing. And then if you do continue to have issues, then you use physical traps or some other control technique. And then any sort of rodenticide is the last resort. And if they're used, they should only be used for a very short period of time, and then they should be removed. And you should always use a rodenticide that is not an SGA. So there's never a reason to use a second generation anticoagulant. There are other rodenticide products that are just as effective when they are needed, but are unlikely to harm wildlife. And then the last thing you can do is become a Bobcat guardian. You can visit savekiawahbobcats.com to get more information and to sign up for that. And that's all I have. So happy to answer questions. Let me stop sharing here so I can see everybody.
Yeah, you can either. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Okay, great. Well, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up or throw it in the chat and I will read it out.
Wow, I must have done really good.
Okay, I have a question, Jim.
Yes.
I can understand how a bobcat can attack a little deer fawn, but what about the raccoons? Are they getting baby raccoons, or do they? I mean, that seems like that would be a real fight.
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't know how heavily bobcats prey on raccoons. I know that it does happen because we have found, raccoon hair in bobcat scats in prior studies. It's probably not that. They're probably more likely to eat a possum than they are a raccoon. But they're also honestly quite probably getting most of it directly from rats and mice. But there's probably some that's coming from possums and raccoons. But we'll learn more about that in the study.
Thanks.
We do
I
have
had a question.
Oh, sorry, go right ahead.
Okay, this is Peggy Barnes. Jim, I know a couple of years ago, I think that you were not able to collar as many bobcats as it seems that you were able to do this winter. Do you see that as an encouraging sign, maybe that the population is rebounding, or it just was good luck, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that, yeah, you're correct. The last few years, it's been a real struggle to catch bobcats. You know, historically, you know, we might catch 8 or 10 every winter, and sometimes we'd only trap for less than a month. For the last few years, we've pretty much had to trap for a full 2 months, and we've caught anywhere from 4 to 6. You know, this year we caught our 5. You know, we had 6 collared, but 1 was from the fall. So we caught 5 in a week, which, you know, was very promising. And then we trapped for another 5 weeks and didn't catch a single bobcat. So a little bit promising, but certainly they haven't rebounded substantially at this point. You know, obviously we're encouraged by, you know, finding a bobcat den last week. You know, as I said, that's only the second we found in 4 years, which is very unusual. We have a second female that appears to have a den as well, which we'll be looking for here in the next probably 2 weeks. You know, the other issue that I didn't touch on, you know, is that we continue to have bobcats hit by cars. And so, you know, obviously that's, every time that happens, that's, you know, further slowing down the recovery. And it's, you know, for example, we had one of our adult, you know, collared adult females hit and killed by a car, you know, 3 weeks ago, Easter weekend. And so obviously, you know, that's a female that was probably going to have kittens and help the recovery. And obviously, you know, now she's not going to be able to. So obviously, you know, just remembering to slow down, especially at dawn and dusk and overnight, and you know, be observant, you know, and help protect our bobcats that way.
And that was my question. You know, I had that raccoon that was love and hate, but when I saw 3 dead raccoons on the road, probably hit by a car, then of course my heart warmed, and of course she didn't come back. So, you know, how much of that? I know what you just said about bobcats. How about how many raccoons are being hit by cars?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's a pretty good many. Obviously, you know, for the last year and a half, we've been trying to pick up every raccoon that gets hit, so that we can get them tested. You know, we've probably picked up 7 or 8, 10 in the last year. But I'm sure a lot more than that are getting hit. You know, those are just the ones that we actually get a report of. And obviously plenty of deer are getting hit too. You know, obviously with our deer numbers up, our deer vehicle collision numbers are up as well.
We've got a lot of people here since COVID.
Yep, that is true as well. More traffic, more chances for, you know, a negative impact to wildlife for sure. Go ahead, Jim.
Jim, how many times a year do bobcats have their kittens, and how many kittens would be an average number that they have?
Sure. So yeah, so a female is only going to have 1 litter per year, typically in April or May. And it'll be anywhere from, it's typically 1 to 3. You know, this one we found last week had 2 kittens. The average probably across all our dens is around 2.5 kittens. And the most we've ever seen is 5. A number of years ago, we had a den with 5 kittens.
Were the kittens that you recently found and the mother, did you test them for the presence of SGAs?
We did not. But the female would have been tested when she was collared. She would have had a blood sample taken at that point. But there's nothing we can really do with the kittens. I mean, they're so small. All we do is pick them up real quickly and figure out if it's a male or a female. We typically weigh them, and then we give them a pit tag, a microchip, so that we can identify them if we catch them further down the road.
We also have a few questions in the chat that I just want to read out here. The first one's from Patricia. She was wondering, has there been any studies of the rodent population? How much has it increased since the loss of bobcats in 2018?
It's a good question. The answer is no. There haven't been any studies, but obviously, this new study, is going to get us some really good factual data on rodents across the island. In terms of their numbers increasing, in a response to bobcats declining, I don't have any evidence to suggest that is taking place. But this topic has come up a few times, and I think, while bobcats certainly do prey on rats and mice, and they provide a little bit of control, of rodent populations, the primary natural control of rodents on this island is birds of prey, owls and hawks, and snakes. Snakes are probably, that have the biggest impact on rodent populations. And so, another issue is that, obviously our, a lot of places on the island, snakes are not loved, and are often persecuted, removed, and killed. And so, continuing things like that is only going to potentially further, exacerbate the rodent problems. So save our snakes, and we'll be doing pretty good.
Another question from Lori is, why are the second generation pesticides even used?
It's a great question. I think they are used because they're highly effective, they're quick acting, and they're cheap. And so honestly, I think that historically, up until we were kind of aware of this issue, it was, just kind of the first tool in the toolbox that a pest control company would pull out. They have these on hand, right? It's very simple to throw out a couple of black boxes and put in this highly effective rodenticide in it, and then check it every 3 months. It's a very simple, cost-effective, strategy for these companies to use. And that's, is it something in the industry that was encouraging these products? I don't know, but certainly as we learn more, it was just, that was what they were going to do to address a rodent problem, was use an SGA, put it in a black box, and solve the problem, whether a problem existed or not.
Another question we got is, who advocates for decreased and consistent speed limits, or how can we advocate for that? I believe it was brought up at a Zoom town hall meeting.
Yeah, so speed limits on the island itself are not set by the town. They're set by the community association, because they're, every road behind the gate is a private road. I know that I'm sure, everyone who lives out here knows that some of the speed limits have kind of changed here in the last few years and dropped to 25 in some stretches of governors. But that would be an issue for the KICA board, most likely. I can tell you that in general, so if we compare if we look at deer vehicle incidents in terms of speed limits, we see that almost all of our deer vehicle collisions occur on roads that are 35 miles an hour. Roads that are 25 miles per hour, we almost never have deer vehicle collisions. The exception on Kiawah is Flyway Drive, where the speed limit is 25, but everyone drives 45. So that one's kind of an outlier. But yeah, for the most part. And then if you take, if you compare deer vehicle incidents, Kiawah versus Seabrook, where Seabrook has a 25 mile per hour speed limit, island wide, they hit 1 or 2 deer a year. And we hit 30 to 50.
Such a big difference. The next question is one I can answer. Is this presentation going to be available on YouTube? Yes, it will. I'll also include all the links you used in the presentation. I'll get that up probably tomorrow, so you can check our YouTube channel for that. Next question, though, is going to go back to you. Do the bobcats have any predators on the island, like gators, et cetera?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I'm sure the occasional bobcat gets taken by an alligator, but it probably is extremely rare. You know, their biggest threat, their biggest predator is man. It's us. So if we, you know, can alter our behavior, you know, we can have the biggest impact on, you know, increasing their survival. But yeah, I mean, you know, around here, they're at the top of the food chain. So there's really nothing out there that's going to prey on them, you know, other than us.
Next question in the chat is Anne. She says she's concerned about the rooster used in bobcat traps. Are they frightened? How does that process work?
Yeah, so, you know, we love our roosters. We take good care of them. My kids typically give them names at the beginning of every year. And so they go out in the trap. They get, you know, cover over the top of their head to protect them from the weather. They get food and water every day. We change them out periodically so that they don't get, you know, too stressed, or, you know, they're not out in the environment too long. And so, you know, I can't tell you if the rooster is scared or not, probably. But certainly, you know, no roosters are killed by the bobcats. And then they, you know, are obviously once the season is over, they are brought back and put in a coop and taken care of.
The next question we have is from Abby. She wants to know, do property owners have to report SGA use? Any indicators of whether SGA use has decreased over the past couple of years as public campaign has been underway?
Yeah, good question. No, there's no requirement to report using an SGA. You know, that's obviously something that we don't think is necessary and we're discouraging. But certainly it probably is still happening out here. We don't have great data on, you know, how, you know, what percent of it, you know, what percent SGA use has declined, but I think it's pretty significant. You know, I think, you know, we've got some anecdotal survey data from pest control companies that suggest that, you know, prior to this, there were about 1,500 residential accounts on Kiawah that were utilizing SGAs, and that currently it's less than 10. So that data comes from a anonymous online survey that the Department of Pesticide Regulation did of pest control companies operating out here. So there are no, you know, there's no paper trail to those numbers, but they certainly suggest a pretty significant decrease in use, at least by the industry.
Next question is coming from Patricia. She's wondering if you know any reason for why the female bobcats are reproducing less.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know 100%, but most likely it is because they are dying before or during reproduction, or were during that time period. So, you know, we had, you know, the first female that died in 2019. You know, she had a kitten, you know, in utero at the time, and then obviously we had the one last year that died during labor. And so obviously, you know, the issue that these bobcats have when these products build up is that, you know, they can't clot their blood. And so any biological process or anything that goes on with them where bleeding is involved, they have the potential to have a negative outcome. You know, the other kind of piece of the puzzle, and, you know, that we don't fully understand, you know, is what at less than lethal levels, what are the impacts of these compounds on bobcats? And there's some evidence from some studies in California that, you know, even some of the first gen products can basically alter the hormone levels and other things in bobcats, and can lead to a reduction in reproduction. So, you know, it's not, the threat from these things is not just, not just immediate death, it's also, impacting them negatively, and reproduction certainly is probably impacted by these products as well.
Another question we have is from Cindy. We have a lot of new property owners on Kiawah who may be unaware of our ecological health issues. Is the town able to communicate with new homeowners and tell them about rodenticides and planting native initiatives?
That's a good question. I don't know that we have any direct outreach to a new homeowner when they purchase property out here or move out here. Certainly, we communicate on a regular basis with everyone who's on our email list, and obviously these topics are certainly brought up and highlighted from time to time. But it's certainly a good, it makes sense that you would want to educate your new homeowners specifically about issues like this. And that probably happens through the community association, maybe. I know that years ago, the Conservancy used to meet with new homeowners or talk to new homeowners directly to try to get them on board with a lot of, conservation efforts. So I don't know if that's still going on, but obviously it, certainly makes sense.
I can add to that actually. So the Conservancy is growing, and my position is a new one in educational outreach. And part of the plan is to have me work more with new homeowners and the realtors and renters to get them to educate new homeowners about threats that are facing our wildlife here on Kiawah Island, if that makes you feel any better.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, either in the chat or, oh, okay, go ahead.
Jim, I wonder if you could mention the black boxes that pesticide companies use to place around homes. Might be one way that homeowners can make a significant impact on the bobcat population.
Sure, yeah. So most anytime a pest control provider is putting out any sort of a rodenticide product, they're going to put it inside a hard black plastic box. It's going to be about, I don't know, a foot long, 8 inches wide. I'm going to have 2 holes in it, and typically they're locked with a special key. And so they open that box and they put in bait blocks and they close it and they check it periodically. These boxes can hold snap traps or other products that are not rodenticides, but normally, that is what is in them, some sort of a rodenticide. And the reason they have to go in these black boxes is that it is mandated by federal law, because these products are dangerous to pets and people, so children, etc. So they've got to be locked away. And so obviously if they can be lethal to your pet or your child, it's probably not something you want to have in your yard anyway, even if it's in a black box.
All right, any more questions? Going once, twice. Okay, all right, well, thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you, Jim, for speaking, very informative on some very important ecological issues. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was a good time. Oh, sorry, one last second question. So are you saying the black boxes are rodenticide?
So the presence of a black box does not necessarily mean that there's a rodenticide bait in there, but it's probably likely. Occasionally, there are companies that put snap traps or other types of rodent traps inside of the black boxes, just to keep them out of sight of the homeowner. But for the most part, a black box is going to contain a rodenticide product.
I have one question to follow up on that. So I noticed there was a discussion among our board about people removing those black boxes from their properties. And I was wondering if they would probably do that because there might be trace amounts of those rodenticides. Would you be concerned about that? If there was a black box at all, would trace amounts probably be present if there was rodenticides used in them?
Yeah, they probably would. These black boxes are most likely the property of the pest control company.
Mm-hmm.
you would think that if you asked them to remove them, they would. And that's probably the best, would be to get them to take them away, tell them you don't want them to use them anymore. But certainly if they've been, left there and they're no longer being serviced, then, it still makes sense to get rid of them. Also because I think as more and more, folks are aware of this, neighbors are looking at neighbors and saying, hey, so-and-so down the street has black boxes all around their house. And so if you're not using a rodenticide, then you probably shouldn't have those boxes.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm?
Ooh, and we have 2 more questions in the chat.
So the first one is, have we considered bringing new bobcats to the island to increase the population?
It's a good question. Yeah, we've thought about it. It would be a challenge. It would be quite difficult to do. I remain hopeful that will not have to happen, and that if we can, get these products, eliminated, reduced substantially, that our bobcats will naturally rebound to take advantage of the great habitat out here. We're seeing some signs that may be happening, which is great. But if we were to try to reintroduce bobcats, number one, and I've said this for years, but Kiawah's bobcats are unique. They've adapted to living in our developed community over many years. So if you grabbed a bobcat from somewhere in mainland South Carolina and stuck it on Kiawah, it's probably not going to do very well.
Mhm.
And also it's also likely to leave. Bobcats have a fairly strong homing instinct, and so it's likely that if you took a bobcat from somewhere and put it out here, it would probably leave Kiawah and go somewhere else. So there are ways you could get around that if we ever decided that was critically necessary to save bobcats on Kiawah. We could, there are methods to do that, and a lot of times that involves holding the animals in a large enclosure on the near the release site for a considerable period of time. It's something they did with gray wolves out west when they were first trying to reintroduce gray wolves. They were bringing them down from Canada and letting them go in Yellowstone, and they were all running away. And what they figured out was if they put them in an enclosure for, I think it was 6 to 9 months, let them become acclimated to the location. When they let them go, they stayed put. So it would be, and the other thing is you'd want to get bobcats from an area that looks similar to Kiawah. So a coastal community, coastal habitats. You wouldn't want to get a bobcat from the mountains of South Carolina and put it down here because it's not going to know what salt marsh is. So hopefully we never get there, but if we do, there is a way it could be done, but it wouldn't be cheap and it wouldn't be easy.
Another question we have is, let's see, who is the best person for new homeowners to contact with other questions, and how is the best way to contact them?
Wildlife questions in general, probably either Aaron or I here at the town, but certainly the Conservancy also is probably a likely place to contact. But yeah, Aaron and I are always happy to answer wildlife questions. You can call or you can email. Emails are on our website. We're happy to help.
Yeah, and same here. Our email is on our website. I can even share them in the description of the YouTube video, along with the links from this presentation.
Sure, and I can type up some resources in the chat because we still got some questions coming in, so I've got
That'd be
time.
great. That'd be great if you have the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just saw that you did that. So then one final question from Patricia is there a way to clean the SGA from the bobcat's blood?
No. It's got to happen over time, and it does. Once this, and where these products accumulate is in the liver. Obviously the liver is our filtering organ, and so contaminants and things end up in the liver, and then it slowly breaks down, is released from the body, out of the liver, and so The only thing that can reduce it is time. And obviously not adding new SGAs to the Bobcat, and allowing it to break down over time.
All right. Any more questions? Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Thanks for joining. You just said great talk, so I wanted to share the compliment along with you.
Great.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we can wrap this up. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Jim, for speaking on it. Again, a lot of great information on bobcats and just wildlife on Kia in general.
You're welcome. Everybody have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Yeah, and
Thank
just
you.